Welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and inside this GameFound preview series, we are checking out Sirens: The Deep Sea from Forgotten Tales. If you haven't checked out my prototype unboxing or the how to setup video, I'll put a link to both of those in the top right-hand corner right now. You'll definitely want to check those out for context. The prototype unboxing will show you all the components that came as part of the prototype, which is all subject to change, and also the how to setup video will show you how this scenario got set up to where it's at right now as we dive into gameplay, so I can actually show you exactly how this thing flows and operates to help you make an informed decision on it. Now, if you want to find the campaign link, I've got that in the pinned comment and video description. There's just a couple more things to do as we head into the very first chapter of this scenario, and a couple mentions I want to make. The first thing to mention is that this scenario is called Sassari as part of the prototype, and it's going to take us through a number of major gameplay elements as we go along. And the first thing we're going to dive right into is the narrative behind what's going on and why we're here. And then we're going to talk about what we need to do in that very first chapter, as well as how we can potentially lose the game as well. And that's very much tied into what's going on for the tasks of chapter number 1. Humans are always looking for new resources, and in recent years they have made a discovery. There are unique and valuable resources in the deep sea. Moreover, there is life. Mysterious beings called Sirens, but they are divided into different kingdoms. Two of them are called Athria and Gania. They protect the deep sea from all beings who want to claim these resources for themselves. And there are the Shirak, the Rakata, and the Krunash, different cultures of honorless sirens addicted to war and conquest. Humans are not able to reach the deep sea with modern technology. There is dark and unknown territory, so they have found a way to ally with these cultures. Through them, the humans want to get their hands on the resources. The task of Athria and Ganaria is to use these resources for Athria and Ganaria to build your own world and to secure the deep sea. Prepare yourself for an immersive adventure. Your loyal caravan leader Sassari was captured by the Shirak and Rakata during one of his missions for your king and queen. However, the scouts have discovered that he was taken to a distant area in the south, to the neutral trading region of Larosar, with the trading city called Durant. There are no borders here, so Shirak and Rakata have also settled here alongside neutral outposts. However, they seem to want to increase their presence there as more and more units are arriving in the area. Durant has offered you his support. Unfortunately, the last strong stream and a deep sea earthquake has caused a lot of damage. You can use Durant and its marketplace, the caravan standee, and the warehouse, which has 4 slots, and the resources and the 2 outposts, but you must first help them rebuild Durant. Help them and you will have Durant on your side to find Sassari. Now, in a moment, we'll go over tasks in terms of what we're trying to accomplish in chapter number 1, but first, we need to find out where our Sirens, our 2 characters, are appearing, and it's based on the appearance markers, which if you watch the setup video, we have a number 1 way up there in the north. To the east, we have a number 2, south 3, and west a 4. So I'll go ahead and make a roll here for Zen, and we'll find out where Zen's going to start off in this equation. Number 3. Zenea enters from the south down here, and next we're going to roll for Vandor. Let's find out where Van is going. It's going to be 2. The Sirens are in place, ready to go. We also get to start with this scenario with some starting materials. Now, each Siren, as you saw during the setup video, has a reference sheet specifically for them. On the one side, it's a breakdown of their special abilities, their active abilities, and their passive abilities. But on the opposite side, both of them have the exact same thing. And that's a full breakdown of all the different buildings you can potentially build, of different varying types, and also what they can actually produce for you. So you can actually take some materials that are at their starting stages and get them into a final material state. So basically having something like wood, this wood right here on the far left-hand side can actually be turned into a board, which then can be converted and used when you're trying to build a building, like the worker tile here, for instance. And there's certain objectives which will be told to you as to things you need to potentially build, and other times you can just go ahead and build things as you need them to progress your engine that you are creating in order to manage and obtain more resources to open up more possibilities for what you can do during gameplay. Now, this is important as we go through gameplay because it gives you an idea as to the cost of things, and it also helps you understand right now when we're gathering starting material as to some of the choices I'm making. Now, 2 of the choices are hard set for both of my Sirens. We both get a board and we both get a stone, but after that, based on playing with 2 players, or 2 characters in this case when I'm playing solo, we get to take another 3 final materials of our choice. So final materials are materials that can be processed from their base level to a final state. So we can only go after the final ones here, and I've made my selections already. On Vander's dashboard, we have a net here in the bottom left-hand corner. At maximum, I can have up to 6 things inside of this area. Of course, if I happen to get something that actually boosts that, whether it's some piece of equipment that upticks the die count, then I can actually add these together and have a higher amount of resources in that area on my character. So beyond just carrying different materials with your character, you can also have a caravan that can be put to good use, and we'll see this later on. They can also move materials back and forth and store things. You have the ability to actually store things in a warehouse as well. So you don't always have to keep them on your character, but it's cool that you can manage them in different ways. So right now, off the start from this scenario, each of the Sirens are getting those 2, but the 3 additional ones I'm choosing is another board, and then we have a net, I should say. This is a green net, and I think these are going to be very useful. Now, they have to be final form materials for these 3, and I know they're final form because when you flip them over, you see their initial form. So we get the advantage of them being already kind of produced or processed to their final state right out of the gates. Looking at Zen, currently the maximum is 5 for this area. We've got 2 in there and adding 3 more. We're going to put another board in here, final state. We're also going to place a green net in here, final state. Oops, that flipped over. And we're going to go ahead and place this, which is called a whole coral. And it's going to be in its final state, the original state being this right here. Now you'll notice that the stone up here doesn't matter which side it's on because this is not considered a final state resource. This is actually one I like a lot, but I cannot choose it for one of the 3 final state materials that I get as part of the scenario. So that's going to do it for me. Happy with these choices. Let's move on. Now you can see on the game board we have a number of materials which are face up, so we can actually go grab those whenever we feel like it. We also have a bunch which are face down, so we have no idea what they are, and we won't know until one of our Sirens goes over top of it. So an aim for us in the early stages of the game, strategically, is to try to get around here and find out what resources are in which places, because those are going to be useful for us strategically. Now, at a certain point during the actual game round, when we get into gameplay, we're going to be drawing an event card, and that event card could have enemies showing up. If they happen to show up, their main focus is going to be going after Durant, which is not a good thing for us. Durant has the ability to defend itself for a single round, and it can handle that attack, but then after that, Durant will fall, and if Durant falls, we lose the scenario. Now you probably noticed there are 3 X tokens on the game board. These tie to tasks and objectives we're trying to complete in chapter number 1. So the first one I mentioned, repairing Durant. 1 board and 1 stone will get that X token off of there, which is a good thing to get things rolling. The next thing we need to do is build a Botanica on M9, then a Polisher on K14. Those are the 2 other X's sitting next to resources. Once we do this, we've got the production rolling in this area. We now shift our attention to the game round tracker, which has a whale on round number 2, which is a major event. We'll talk about when it actually happens. But there's another one that needs to be placed here as well for this scenario, and that is on round 3. We're placing the event marker. The aim here is to try to get Durant up and running before round 3, and then of course when we hit round 3, we're going to be able to go through another narrative progression in the scenario. We know our 2 tasks we need to focus on, so now we head into the game round order. You can see this right on the cards for the Sirens. It breaks down exactly what you go through in a round. So you start with a story, which we've read. We go to the event card next, so every single round we'll be pulling an event card. It's going to have something on it that will throw wrenches. It's going to potentially give benefits, or maybe even throw enemies at you. And then after that, we have the game round board, so basically things are going to shift on that board. The tokens that are sitting on there are going to move down. If anything happens to connect to something like the whale, for instance, or the event token we already placed in there, we trigger those and resolve them. Then we go down to the Sirens, which means both of our Sirens or characters are going to take their turns. Then NPCs are going to go. Then the whale's going to go. Then the opponent or bosses are going to go. And again, dependent on who's actually out in the scenario at the given time. Otherwise, you'll be skipping past some things. Now, once we get into the Siren's turn there in the center, this is where the movement values start really mattering. Now, on both of my Sirens, I have a movement value that ties in not only to movement, but also translates to actions that you can try to accomplish. There's a number of different actions that require 1 movement, and there's a bunch that don't require any movement whatsoever. And then there's some things that you do that don't require movement, but they will end your turn immediately. Let's go ahead and draw our very first event and see what happens. This event tells us that the direction of the main stream has changed spontaneously. We're going to set the compass of the stream to the cardinal point north. Now inside of the game, again, you're all underwater, so as the actual current changes directions, that actually has major gameplay impacts. The game round board is where this current is tracked, and as you can see for this scenario, it was set to west to start, but it's abruptly changed to north. That's the way the current will be flowing right now based on the event, and it won't be triggering this moment, but it's something to be aware for the future, because you want to think strategically in terms of placement of your sirens. You can actually make use of the fact the current will be pushing you in a direction that actually works out for you, or the other way around, it pushes you into something you do not want to be interacting with, like enemies or a boss or something like that, if you're trying to avoid those. Now, the other side of the equation is you can avoid the current by actually staying within one field of one of the raised levels. As you saw on the game board earlier, there's multiple raised levels. If you're within one of those, you're able to basically hunker down when the current comes through and it won't affect you. With that change now made on the game round board, we're going to go ahead and increase the round to its first position here, which doesn't have anything to resolve at this point in time. Lots in the future coming up. Now, you might be wondering what this row is down here. This is the game phase. You will not increase this game phase until your round has gone all the way down to the end of the round tracker. Then you basically reset the round tracker and you go to the next game phase. Let's go ahead and start with Zen. She's close to where Durant is, so we might as well head there and actually be productive. Now, when you're looking at a Siren's turn and you're beginning it, you're going to also take a real close look at the movement point value you have down here, which in this case right now is a 7. So we have 7 movement to spend, and if we take a look at our Siren here, the Siren can move in any direction, 7 spaces essentially. We could burn our entire turn just doing movement, or we could do movement to a certain point, keeping some movement points back so we can actually take some actions. So at this point, we want to get close to Durant to be able to repair it, so we're going to move 1 to here, 1 to here, and of course, because you can move and also take actions, you can freely break up your movement as you wish. You can take a movement of 2, do an action, do another movement of 2, do an action. You can break it up however you want, which gives you a lot of strategic freedom. It doesn't just end off your turn real abruptly. So here we're going to be from this location starting. We moved 2, so we spent 2 movement already. We want to get up to this level 1 platform. If we want to go up to this level 1 platform, it's an increase of +2 movement. So it'll be a total of 3 movement to get up and over this. So now we've used 5 movement total. 1 more gets us adjacent to Durant, and with the final movement, we'll do an action. I'm going to take a step back from what I just said moments ago. At this point, we have spent 6 movement. We have 1 left, but we do not need to spend a movement to do what I'm about to do, which is repair this building. But what will happen is it's considered an ending of a turn action. So in other words, we decide to go ahead and repair Durant with the materials that we have. We're going to end off our turn and lose out on that 1 movement left. So Zen is going to go ahead and spend the 2 materials she has. We're going to remove the X marker off Durant, and we're going to end her turn. The first task has been completed. The second task is now to do some building of buildings that are close to some of these resources in the future. Vander is up next, and as you can see down the bottom right-hand corner of his dashboard, he's got movement of 5, not as much as Zen, but that's okay because there's many ways in the gameplay you can actually increase this, whether it's actually bumping up the stat itself with equipped items, potentially using consumables on the far right side. Abilities can also play into this as well. There's a number of ways to mitigate things that are different between the different Sirens and the strengths and weaknesses. Now, one thing I want to retroactively do with Zen, which I forgot to do because I was a little excited to get to Durant and repair it, is I had 7 movement from where I was, which was right here, and I could have gone 1, 2, and explored this resource by flipping it over, 3, jump up here for another 3, which would be 6, and then 1 right here would have been 7, and she'd be exactly where she already is. So when you actually go on top of one of these resources that are hidden, you can actually flip it over, and you gain the resource that's there. So let's go ahead and do it, because I should have. Now this resource, unlike some other ones, which actually provide you some type of material, this one is called a life stream. And what happens is when you pass through this or land on it, is it's going to replenish your life stream bar. Now on the dashboards for the Sirens, you'll see a number of different trackers. One here is strictly for your health. Then you have the life stream bar, which is currently at 20. In other words, it's already maxed out. So even though I found it and passed through it, it didn't actually provide any benefit right now. But if this had been dropped down to say 10, it would replenish back up to 20. This is a good thing because having a lot here in the life stream is good for a number of reasons. One is you can actually use this icon's value by dipping this down to pay to trigger abilities. And you'll see the life stream value going across the rows of your abilities. So we actually have ability here 1 at 2 life stream points to use. This one's 1. So once we actually start getting into the spot where I start using them, I will be depleting this, but now we have a source to actually replenish it back. We're done with that bunny trail for the moment. Let's get back to Vander and get him moving. Vander moves 2 and finds a resource here. Flipping it over, it is a stone and is going to gain that stone resource and then continue moving. So I place an additional stone resource in his inventory, which actually pushes him up to a maximum of 6, which is perfect. The good news is we're getting close to a warehouse here. There's a warehouse in this location right here, which can actually hold resources. So even though Vander has a whole bunch and he might not be able to make use of them right now, we can store some there. So we've gotten up close to an outpost, which is right beside us. The warehouse is the chest, which is next to that. And then above that, you got that hand symbol, which is the magician. Now, the magician is where you can actually take different materials that you have and trade them in order to start going and advancing up your skill tree to open up abilities. Now, as you likely remember from earlier in the video, I showed you that building breakdown reference. If you flip it over to the opposite side for either of the Sirens, you get the Sirens specific, in this case Vander, skill tree. So you can actually see the full breakdown of things you can actually go after with the Magician. If you go to that particular building and interact with it, you're able to go ahead and exchange in different materials in order to unlock things. And of course, like a typical skill tree, you have to start at the very bottom from level 1, working your way up to 4. And of course, if you have a certain one unlocked, like I have Mighty/2 unlock, which means I could go after assault attack or paralysis based on the lines that are connected in between. Other icons here, we have the group icon, which basically means if you have a group of Sirens, then you can actually make use of that ability. You can also make use of group abilities from this tree in a solo fashion. In other words, with just one Siren in the equation. But these ones that show just one icon of an individual specifically let you know you can only use this if you're involved in something by yourself. So Vander at this point has used all of his movement. His turn is now done. But one thing I need to mention, because I just caught it, was that the spirit point bar, which is this one here, we haven't really gone into specifics on this one just yet. We will talk about it soon. Should actually have started at 4 and not 10. Now I did this correctly for Zen, but I didn't do it for Vander. For some reason I put it at 10. The next step of the game round order is to talk about NPCs. We currently have one. After we repaired Durant, we had the ability to use the caravan. The caravan, when it's next to us, we can actually give it some of our materials that we have. So we can actually allow it to carry it for us. It has a movement of 6 during this time frame. It also has a net of 6 in terms of how much it can carry. So it's going to be very handy from getting resources picked up and moved from one place to another. You can actually bring them between warehouses. So for instance, you could actually move material from one individual Siren all the way over to a warehouse somewhere else. Again, depending on your strategy and what you're trying to accomplish, these caravans are very handy. Now, at this point in time, don't have too much I need to do, so I probably will just leave the caravan alone, but it will become a very important part of the equation when production starts getting going. Next, we activate the Nawakai, which currently does not activate because based on the game round, we haven't hit that whale marker yet. So it's not on the game board for it to activate at this point. We skip right past it. Then it's opponents. We don't currently have any enemies on the game board. Skip past that. Boss, skip past that. Well, I guess it can't always be calm under the sea. Even though we were able to rebuild Durant, which is a positive, maybe we attracted some attention here. The event that came out says to draw a creature from the opponent cards. We're going to use the appearance markers to determine with a die where it's going to be placed. From the opponent card deck, we pulled the top one, which was Antara. Now let's roll a d4 and find out where this enemy is going to appear. It feels like this enemy knows exactly what we're up to and is right on us right out of the gates. Now I've also gone ahead and pulled out the card for the enemy. Normally this would be off to the side. I'll place it here for now so it's more within easy view. And also a couple tokens, which later will make sense once we bring the combat board out. We have some dice here. Some ones will be primarily rolling during its attack and defense. And then another one, which is a loot die if we take it down. We head to the game round board, and we're going to move the round marker, which is going to land us on round number 2, where the whale token is. Nawakai is going to go ahead and spawn. And also the deep sea current is going to be shifting things as well. Now, as I spawn the Nawakai, it's going to come in the opposite side of the game board from where we currently have the token for the deep sea stream. So it's going to come in from the south, heading north. Now, it's worth mentioning in the prototype, it just tells us to make sure that we're spawning it on the opposite side from the token for that deep sea current, but anywhere along that edge works. So lots of action happening in this scenario based on how things have panned out so far. Again, if you replay the scenario, things may be positioned differently and certain things wouldn't even be here. But we have an enemy from the south as well as this creature, and it's going to progress in a northern fashion across the game board. It's going to move during its own section of the game round itself, which we'll get to in a little bit. But basically, when this thing is flowing through or past you, you're able to get up close to it within one field and do a mini game. And you can actually roll some dice in order to try to do a scale scale hunt. And if you're successful at the scale hunt, you gain a scale. You can get a certain color, whether it's red or blue. You can work your way up after interacting with this thing over a series of interactions where it will come back into the fray again later on. After you've successfully gotten a scale, it'll pop back in another time. You can go on another hunt, grab another scale, and eventually get to the point where you can actually exchange that in for legendary gear, which is pretty awesome. Now, you don't have to interact with this thing at all. You can completely leave it alone. It'll just do its own thing. But if you want to get some really nice gear out of it, it's a nice thing to distract you. And of course, it's worth mentioning that this is not considered an enemy, so you can't come up to it and try to take it out, and it's not normally going to do any kind of attacking unless scenario rules actually add that to the equation in some way, shape, or form. Going to the game round track, we also are going to activate the Deep Sea Stream, which is going to be affecting level 1 and level 3, which is going to move characters 2 spaces in the direction that we have on this game board, which is north. For clarity's sake, there are 3 different levels in the game. We have the board itself at level 1, this is level 2, and this is level 3. Hopefully I didn't mess those up earlier in the video, but what's going to happen right now is level 1 is going to be impacted, level 3 is going to be impacted, nobody's on level 3, but everybody on that level 1 is going to be moving. So the current pulls everything forward 2 spaces. Now, strategically, I was just 1 field away here with Vander. If he had been up against this level 3, he could have been hiding behind this and wouldn't have been impacted by the move north of 2. But unfortunately, he was caught up as he was actually right here. We now move to the Sirens' turn. Zenya's going to go first. She's going to move 1 space in order to be right beside or 1 field away from the enemy. Now, after moving 1, if she wants to engage with the enemy, she has to spend another movement point to engage from 1 space away. She's going to do that for a total cost of 2 out of her 7 movement. The first thing we need to do when we head into a battle is to set up the battle round board, which is quite simplistic to do. We take a look at the Siren that's actually engaged in the battle, and we take that token, which is represented by the same number on the game round order card, and we're going to place that here on this battle round board. But first, before we do that, we need to determine initiative. So we just take the token, put it to the side for now, and we'll also take a token for the enemy. We leave 1 on the enemy card, and then the other 1 can come down here to represent this enemy. Every battle starts with an initiative phase, and this is resolved in one of 2 ways. The first way is to take your initiative stat, which is on your Siren's dashboard, which I'll show you in a moment. It's basically a hand symbol. So for Zenya, it's the blue hand symbol, which shows 2. Now, you could have a die there if you happen to have equipped stuff that gives you some kind of benefit in initiative, which we don't in this case. Actually, a perfect example of that symbol right here is here, but it only has a 0 on it, so it doesn't give me any benefit whatsoever. But I do have a 2 by default for Zenya, so that's my initiative. Then I would roll 1 white Siren die, add it to it, and that would be my initiative total. The enemy would take its initiative value, which is printed on its card, and it would roll a black die. Whoever has the highest value would be the one that gets to go first. Now, the faster way to do it is to scratch all the dice rolling and just look at the actual printed default stats for both. Now, just to clarify some things about the actual card for the enemies, first off, we have the movement for the enemy, how many black dice are being rolled for the enemy when we actually get to rolling, how many spirit points we're going to get when we take the enemy out if we actually are able to do that. We have an attack side, a defense side based on a combination of dice rolled from the black dice that might make up some kind of pattern that gives an effect or an additional boost to the scenario. There's a special defense which cannot be stopped or blocked in any way, shape, or form if we land it for the enemy, 3/3, which is a special defense. And then over here, of course, there's multiple levels. In this case, I'm playing at level 1 based on the scenario for what we're playing right now. So we can see the total health is at 10, which is why I have the tracker here in the 10th position. If you were on level 2, you'd have a tracker of the color-coded red at the 14 position, for instance. This is the initiative value, which is 2. So ironically, the 2 here and the 2 for Zenya is exactly the same. So we do have to roll dice in this instance. We can't just take it at face value, but we could in any other case where they're different. Then we have the sword value, which of course is your attack value for the enemy, so it's 3, defense is 3, and the dodge value. Dodge is basically a way to avoid damage, which is pretty beneficial, so long as when the enemy rolls a dodge die, they actually land that dodge symbol. Then if they do take damage in the combat, they get to basically negate some of it as if it didn't even happen. So down here is the stat default 2 for Zenya. So we know we have to roll that die because both are 2 initiatives. We're going to roll a white Siren die and add into it. We got ourselves a 1, so it's a 3 for Zenya. And on the enemy side of the equation, which is Antera, she's got a 2 plus a 3 on the die, which is a 5. So unfortunately, the enemy is going first. The battle board is all set up for this 1 versus 1 situation. There are situations where enemies, if they happen to meet up together, will start to travel in packs. So you'll actually have multiple multiple enemies of up to 4 in a pack that will come after you if they happen to be heading towards what they want to go after, which is typically buildings they're trying to destroy. So they want to go after Durant, for instance, or maybe an outpost and stuff like that. But if they get in kind of the same line and run into each other, they kind of group up to make life a little bit more tough for you. But you can also bring in multiple Sirens to a battle in order to give yourself an advantage or just to try to mitigate some of the pain. So a battle is going to be a series of rounds which will continue until someone either wins or somebody escapes. And in this particular situation, I'm planning on trying to take this thing down no matter what it takes. So hopefully I'm not the one that actually gets knocked out before the enemy does. Now, what will happen is once the enemy takes his turn, because it's going first, it will just simply move his token down here to represent that. Then I go with the next one. Now, when you're doing a 1 versus 1, you could even skip this completely because the battle itself is really just a back and forth. You're not going to need this board as much. But once you actually start having multiple enemies or multiple Sirens involved in the same battle, this initiative track is going to be very beneficial. And Terra's got the first attack in this battle, so let's talk about how this flows. So first off, we got a sword here representing attack value of 3 for level 1. So that's what we have as a 3 to start. And then we're going to also roll 2 black dice. We know this because there's a triangle here that stays 2, so we're always rolling these 2. Again, if the number combination that's here matches anything in the table for the attack side, we're adding that into the equation as well, so bad news on that front. The one down below here can't be blocked in any way, shape, or form if we happen to land 2 3s, but this one is really focused on defense. So when this thing is attacking right now, that's not really going to do much anyway, so it actually would be a good thing in this case if it happens to land that. The other dice we have here is a loot die. If we happen to kill this thing, reducing its health down to 0, we roll the loot die and get something wonderful. The dodge die here is not going to be used when it's attacking, so these 2 dice are off to the side, and the target die is really only necessary when it's actually going up against multiple Sirens, because a 1 versus 1 battle, it already knows its target. This target die is going to specify what it's going after, whether it's the Siren with the lowest health, the highest health, or all the Sirens. That keeps things really interesting. I like this target die because of that. Really throws a nice wrench into the whole combat situation. And as I mentioned, the wrench isn't going to be that bad when you're playing a 1 versus 1 battle, but if you're playing a battle, say, with 1 enemy and 2 Sirens, that target die can become a problem for you, especially if this enemy can start hitting both individuals at the same time. That can be a lot of damage coming at you. So anyway, getting back to the attack, we're going to roll these dice and see how that Terra does on this attack. So we got double 1s. So a 3 right out of the gates, a 4, a 5, and then because these are 2 1s, we trigger this one here for +2, so that's going to be a 7. Now there is one other die that could enter into the fray at some point in time. It's a bonus die. If activated on a battle card, the enemy can get a blue crit die, which can add more fun to the equation. 7 attack coming at us. Let's see what Zenea can actually pull off defensively. So first off, we have a defense value of 2 by default. We could have more if we happen to have some fancy armor like Vander does. Vander has a default of 7 before anything's even added to the equation. So he can just flat out block this attack this round right now. But it's not Vander dealing with this, it's Zen. So we have 2. We are able to roll 2 Siren dice to add into the equation. Very similar to the 2 black dice that the enemy got there and added in. Except we don't have the triggered abilities like the enemy does. In this case, for us, we have abilities that we can actually pay for using our spirit stream here. Use these values based on the rows. So if we wanted to, for instance, trigger blockade, for instance, and actually blockade's a good one. It says the attack ability of the opponent is blocked for you. So that means we could literally block that +2 ability that it got when the 2 dice landed as 1s. So we could literally go ahead and do this, knock this over to the side, and pay 1, dropping this down, which I'm going to do to knock 2 out of the equation. Now, other things that can be done, but I'm not going to do them during this turn, is that if we happen to spend some spirit points, if we happen to spend 4, it's actually marked right here, we can gain additional dice, especially a defensive die or an attack die, and of course we can boost it even further to kind of ×2 whatever results we get. There's a crit die as well you can get, so there's other ways to add even more into the equation. When you start attacking bosses, for instance, you're going to really want to start ramping your character up to make sure you can actually do some serious damage. But we're going to go ahead right now and do a defensive roll. So let's go ahead and see what we get on top of what we already have. So we have a 2, and we're jumping it up by a 3, so that's 5. And guess what? Because I went ahead and decided to do that blockade, that reduced the 7 down to 5. So we've matched it, and at this point, we are A-OK. Now, saying that, there was one thing I forgot. We were on the defensive, we can absolutely roll a dodge die. It wouldn't matter in this case because nothing's getting through, so didn't bother rolling it anyway. But normally you go ahead and roll the dodge die at the same time as you're rolling the white dice as well. And if you happen to land the symbol, the idea behind it is, let's say hypothetically we had actually gotten a 2 on that roll. So say it would have been a 7 versus a 6, so 1 damage would get through. If we rolled the dodge die at the same time as the white dice and we got this symbol, that would mean we could use our dodge ability, which down here right now defaults to 4, which means we can actually block 4 damage from actually getting through to us, which is pretty incredible. So if there's a real big divide between the attack value and the defensive value, and you get that dodge symbol, you can really avoid some nasty damage. It can end up being huge. So getting this up there is a real nice benefit. The downside is the dodge die to roll this icon and actually land it is not easy. It is a 2 in 6 chance to make it happen on defense. It's now time to go in the offensive. It's our turn to make an attack. So we have a 3 here by default, a 3 on the die, thanks to our weapons making things stronger. So we have 6 right to the gates just from these alone. And we're also going to be able to roll the Siren dice. I have some abilities that I'm eyeing that I'm probably going to trigger. Any bonus dice we could potentially use right now, but I don't currently have any at the moment, so I'll leave it as is. We're going to go ahead and roll these dice, see what we add into the equation. We got ourselves a 1 and a 0. If we have any bonus dice to add into the equation, we can. We also have the ability to use our unlocked special abilities. We do have 3 special abilities we could potentially use. The Siren singing one requires a group in order to pull it off. Basically, your Sirens are singing together. You get a kingdom bonus, and that gives you a +2 damage on top of things, so it's a nice one to use at some point. This one here is a mount ability secret swap, so you can change one of your attack dice with the opponent. Kind of nice to have. And then this one over here is a special for towing. It allows you to basically pull a Siren on the map with her own movement, so it allows you to kind of move somebody around. But none of those are really going to affect things right now, but these certainly could be beneficial. I have one that actually is pretty good over here. The sweeping blow, if I had got a higher result on one of these dice, I could have times it by 2. I don't feel like timesing this by 2 and just getting a 2 is going to be a really good spending of one of these points. But I am kind of tempted to do it anyway, and I might do it. Let's go ahead and do a sweeping blow and just jump it up. So we'll use that. We'll knock this down by 1, and we essentially make that 1 higher. So we got a total of 8. Let's go ahead and roll the dice for the enemy. Of course, they're rolling the 2 black dice, but they're also rolling their green die as well to see if they potentially can dodge, and they have a dodge value of 2 where they can escape from 2 damage. And of course, their defensive abilities could trigger as well. Let's see what happens. A 0 and a 3 and no dodge. Well, that's good news for me. So their default defensive value is 3, +3 is 6. That's all they got there. No defense, and they didn't trigger any abilities, so it's going to be a 6 defense versus an 8 attack, so 2 damage. We're knocking them from 10 down to 8. It's now back to them. They're going to throw an attack against me. Let's see how they do. They got themselves a 0 and a 2. Nothing for the attack bonus there. That's great. A 2 on top of the 3 is a 5, and that's all they have. They've only got a 5, and I've already got 2 defense. Let's see how we do with our roll. We got way more than enough to defend against that attack. Now, just before I go ahead with my attack, I want to make mention of the fact that the enemy started off the second battle round. The second you go into a brand new round, all of your abilities basically come back and can be used again. Again, so long as you actually have the points to spend to actually trigger them again. And of course, you can only trigger it once within that round. So we started the round with all of our abilities reset. The enemy just tried to attack us and failed. We defended against it. Their turn is done. We now come to us. We're going to attack back at them. And I'm currently just going to ride with what I've got here. We've got 6 right at the gates. Let's see how we do on the dice roll. We got a total of 8. I'm going to do that sweeping blow now because a ×2 on an attack die is going to make this a 4. So now we have 10 coming at the enemy. Let's see if we can actually pull off a decent sized hit. Hopefully it doesn't hit the dodge die. That's what I'm really hoping it doesn't do. Come on. Yes, that's a great roll. That was a fantastic attack at 10 with a defense value of 3, and then the 1 is 4, so 6 getting through. We're very close to taking this enemy out. And just so you can see the conclusion and cleanup of a battle round, I just went ahead and did my turn and attack, so I'm done. That's the end of the battle round, so these things are reset. That also means anything the ability-wise that I've used comes back. Another tip to mention is that if you want to make this even faster back and forth and less things to track, you can completely ditch this board when you're doing 1 versus 1 battles, as you'll know exactly who's going first every single game round. You won't need to track it there. So I literally, at this point, I'm just going to take this away. And the next thing you can stop doing on a 1 versus 1 battle, Siren versus enemy, is actually even moving these white markers at all. So long as you're paying the requirement, you don't have to worry about bouncing them back and forth. The only reason that that actually needs to be tracked is when you have multiple Sirens helping each other out at different time frames, or maybe you have multiple enemies, the battle's a little more complex. Then you want to actually keep track of which ones you've already used and ones you haven't, to make sure you don't double use something you shouldn't be or make a mistake along the way. But with a 1 versus 1 battle, things are easily tracked and you can reduce the management of things just real easy. All right, so the enemy's coming at me next. Let's go ahead and take the 2 black dice and give these a roll. We get 3 going into this, and they're chucking 2 zeros at me. That's awesome. It's attacking me for 3. I already have 2 defense. I'm just happy to continue using these 2 white dice. I think I'll get what I need, and I did, just barely. Should have rolled the defensive die in that situation, but knew I was going to get it anyway, so didn't need to. Moving into the attack, let's roll and see if we can put some damage down. Now here's the question, do I want to go crazy? Probably not. I'm pretty close to taking this out. Don't really need to add any more bonus dice in the equation. I could pay to kind of bring something in with some spirit points and everything else, but that'd just be kind of a waste at this point. The other thing to note too is I believe, based on the prototype rolls, if I've read them correctly, is the fact that these dice, these bonus dice, have to be added in before the battle happens, and they're a one-time use. So it's a good idea to actually spend your spirit points on the right-hand side of your board. I have 4 to actually get a die like this that's a little bit off camera, the purple one here, which actually is represented by the red die for the attack side of the equation. Yellow is for defense, and the crit die here. You can get a die into your board before a battle and then make use of it during a battle. So let's go ahead and make a die roll here. That's decent. So we got ourselves 6, 7, 8, and we'll times 2 just to be crazy, just to make sure that this damage gets through. So we'll use 1 point from here. So that's a 10 attack coming through. Let's see if this enemy can defend against it. And it does not do a good job of it. It defends at 3, 4, 5, 6, but 4 gets through. It didn't dodge. That takes it out. Now, the best part of taking out an enemy is you get to reap some rewards. We get some spirit points, which are 2 right here, but it's worth mentioning for Xenia, on her passive abilities that are always on, she gets a +1 spirit after a victory. So that works out pretty nicely. That passive ability is over here. Hard to see, but it says +1 spirit after a victory, Spirit Rush 1. And again, it's a passive, so you don't actually have to activate or spend anything to get it. So we get a +1 plus a 2 off of the card, so it's going to jump it by 3. So we're going from 4 to 7. This is how you can start kind of saving up some spirit points to then start cashing them in to actually add extra dice for future combats to do far more damage with a wider difference between attacks and defense. All that's left to do now is a loot die roll to see what we get for taking this thing out. There's lots of great things in this loot die. The ×2 with a question mark means 2 resources of your choice. A question mark is 1 resource of your choice. If you see a plant symbol, you get a plant of your choice. If you see a pearl symbol, you get a pearl of your choice. A mussel, you get a mussel. Or a coral, you get a coral. So actually, out of all of them, this is literally the best result. I got an awesome roll in the loot die, which gets me 2 materials of my choice. I'm choosing 2 stones, which will get me to my maximum inventory in my net of 5. Antara was taken down, the miniature is removed, and it's a good thing because its focus was to try to get to Durant, and it would have tried to attack Durant as its main sole purpose, and then it would have gone through 1 round of defense Durant would have had from the token. After that, Durant would have fallen, and we would have lost the scenario. We'll continue Zen's turn. She's already used 2 movement, 1 to move, 1 to attack. She's got 5 movement remaining. One of the other things I want to accomplish on her turn is to build the Botanica. In order to get that done, we're going to need this net here, a board, and a stone. So we're going to use those 3 resources once we move to the right position. But first, I'm way too intrigued by this Nawaki. I want to show you guys how this thing works. Let's get 1 field away from it and interact with it, try and go on a scale hunt. With that movement, that's another 3 spent, so we spent 5 of her 7 movement. We still have 2 more left. When we go on a scale hunt, there's a specific card for this miniature. We'll flip it over, and it'll tell us how things break down in terms of the scales and legendary items. So when we go on a hunt, we'll be rolling some dice, and when we do, if we get certain combinations, that will allow us to take one of the scales, and of course, as you save things up, you're able to cash in your scales in order to get legendary equipment, as I mentioned, depending on whether or not it's one of the 3 major categories. There are cards with those symbols, those gold symbols on the back. Those are the legendary items. Now here are the cards themselves, the legendary cards across multiple different categories. Again, this is just prototype for now. Flipping this over to the opposite side, you can actually see some of these abilities and the artwork on them, and of course, these will be fleshed out even further in the final version. We got bumps to movement, life points, attacking, all that kind of stuff. And if we go all the way to the back end here, we start getting some really cool abilities on these, on the bottom parts of the card, and you start getting into the actual armor sets and the weapons themselves. Now you'll notice it'll show you exactly how many scales you need in order to take that legendary item. You'll also get to bump up your attributes as it displays here, potentially even your health. You'll see a special here for legendary cards, which is kind of cool because you get this right away. So basically after a victory in this case, you're going to gain some health. That's something that my other cards that I have currently equipped that are not legendary don't let me do. So if you actually take a look here, down here we have the water cutter, one of the starting weapons. This one, you get these stats when you first take it, but you have to actually pay more resources to upgrade to get that bottom row. Legendary cards are different. You're going to basically get a special that you'll be able to make use of depending on the criteria on the card. Now, just before we actually do this scale hunt, want to mention one more thing. Consumables. We haven't really focused on them, but they're very beneficial. So essentially, what a consumable does is you'll have 3 of them here in this scenario, and you're able to use it for its benefit across the bottom, so long as you meet the criteria of whatever is stated. Once it's used, it gets flipped over. If you want to bring it back, then you simply have to use materials, as depicted right on the card, in order to recreate it to take use of that benefit again in the future. So I actually have one here called Explorer that says, always find the artifact. So it's actually pretty cool if we end up doing some exploring in the game when we get into artifacts, which is a separate thing I'll talk about maybe after we deal with this particular scale hunt. We can just guarantee be successful with this consumable. There's also ones that will just add in a D4 to do direct damage to the enemies, which is an awesome boost. And this one down here, Group Escape, it says all Sirens escape from a battle. So if you get into something you really don't want to handle, as I talked about before with battles, you're either trying to kill that enemy and take it out, or you're trying to escape, and this is a get out of jail free card in a situation that is pretty nasty. So when a Nawakai actually spawns and shows up and you do a scale hunt, you have the chance to capture a red or a blue scale every game round. Now, if you're standing adjacent to it, you got 3 attempts each game round to roll one of 3 dice combinations, which are shown right on the card that you can see face up. If you fail, you have another chance in the next round anyway. But again, this is all consuming time, and also you have to be next to this thing. So if you're taking too much time to go over here and gather scales, you're not being productive in other areas. So it's a bit of a situation of, is this thing moving past where you're potentially actually working currently in order to build things up, so it makes sense to kind of do what I did and jump over and try and interact with it, or is it too far away and maybe something to work on later on? So as this thing continues to move north, we can keep trying to interact with it round by round, hoping to get something out of it. But once we actually do, this thing's only going to spawn once within a game phase, which is the full 10 rounds of gameplay. Then the next game phase, the thing will reappear again, and you'll have another opportunity to go after another scale. Now you'll also notice here, not just scales, you could also potentially, when doing this scale hunt, actually get some spirit points, which is actually pretty cool. We could bump things up in that capacity too. Let's see what we get for a combo. We got double ones, that's a red scale. Now it's worth noting, even though this looks like a typical material, this does not count towards the maximum you can hold in your net whatsoever. It's just bound to the actual character that's holding it, and it's working my way towards getting something legendary in the top 2 options. Now earlier when I was talking about the whale here, I mentioned that the second you get a scale, the thing disappears. That's only true if every single siren in the game has gotten a scale from it. So at this point, it's going to stick around because Vander could potentially still get a scale. Once that happens, there's really 2 ways you can do this. You can say at that point that now both players have gotten a scale, so this no longer needs to be on the game board and can be removed, or you can leave it on the board and it will continue its journey to the north and eventually disappear off the map. So at the beginning of Zen's turn, we went and moved here. We attacked for 1, so that's 2 movements spent. We moved 1, 2, 3, that's 5 movements spent. We used another movement to interact with a scale hunt, that's 6. We have 1 more remaining, so at this point we're just going to head north and be adjacent to the X. Now what's awesome is we're perfectly in place to use one of our end turn actions, which doesn't cost any movement whatsoever. We're able to go ahead and construct a building. So to end off my turn, taking an action to build a building, the Botanica, and this is going to cost a stone, a board, and a green net. Free materials have been spent in order to build a Botanica right here, which is great news because it is tied nicely to this particular resource. When you do it like this is a production building we just created. Later on, when we get to a production step on the game round board, so you know how the actual deep sea current can change on certain spots on the game round board, well, there are ones which have a specific icon, I'll show you later on, that is for production. And if you happen to have a production building next to a resource that ties, then you actually gain a resource in that spot, which is nice because you could have something like the caravan come by and pick it up and move it elsewhere. You could move it to your storage. You could have your siren come by and grab it. So actually building these production buildings next to a resource, once you discover more of them out there, can really get the engine going. Now it's time for Vander's turn, and he wants to boost his movement. He has 5 by default, but he wants to get a little bit more done this turn, so he's going to use a consumable he has called Boost for an additional 4, giving him a total of 9. Now this card will be flipped over as a consumable, and until I spend these 2 resources here, this will not be coming back, but for now still stays with him. Vander heads to the nearest warehouse connected to an outpost and is going to drop off 3 of the material resources that he has in order to free up some space in his net. His net now has more room at a maximum of 6 currently, 3 in there. We're going to go ahead and spend some of our spirit points in order to boost the resource boost marker. So I'm going to spend 2 of his spirit points, dropping them down to 2. And the resource boost marker will increase by the same amount spent, which is 2, bringing us to the +1 position, which means the next time we gather a resource, we are going to get an additional 1. With 7 movements still remaining, we're going to go ahead and get up onto that level number 2. We've now used 8 movement to get on top of the green pearl resource. At this point in time, I'm going to take that resource instead of just taking 1 like I normally would. Because I actually boosted that marker to a +1, we get 2 of them. It's important to note when you take advantage of the boost marker, as I just did on that track, we increased by 2 just moments ago to get this boost. We have to now reset it back down to 0. That's been done. Now these 2 green pearls are going into my inventory. They're currently not processed into their final material form, but if we do this, which I'm going to accomplish in the near future, then we'll be able to potentially put it towards maybe a visit to the magician there on the right here in order to unlock some new abilities. We're 1 field away from the X objective or task marker, which is telling us to create a polisher, which actually works out really good for us because after getting some green pearls, we could potentially polish them up and get them into their final material state right here. But if we want to end off our turn, we can go ahead and build this building. We need a stone, a board, and a green net, which I do have on Vandor right now. So we're going to go ahead and build this production building. I just moved Vander out of the way just a little bit so you can see the X where we'll be building it to meet the task we're trying to complete. And you can see here the 3 materials needed to make this happen. Just like that, we have 2 production buildings built recently tied to resources, which during the production step of the game round board, we are going to be able to take advantage of additional resources being generated. Now there is something important I want to mention, and it comes down to the processing of these materials, going from green pearl to a final material like polished, or yellow to polished, or blue pearl to polished. The 3rd line of each of these has been removed in terms of the resource here. So you can completely ignore these, and anywhere where a blue pearl would actually be required in this prototype, instead you can use a yellow pearl or a green pearl. So in the final version, the streamlining of how many different types are there and present in gameplay is going to be fine-tuned just a bit to make things move along that much quicker with the different materials. So inside of Vander's net currently, and his turn just ended after building that building, but it's worth mentioning he has 2 green pearls currently, and if he actually gets them polished up in the future, he will be on his way towards actually getting this critical hit unlock, which is a level 1 ability, an active ability he can use to get an auto crit when using a crit die. We now head to the NPC's turn, and at this point we have a caravan here. We talked about this the last time the caravan activated, but I chose not to move it. That was just a choice. At the current time, I definitely want to make use of it. It has a 6 move and also can carry 6 in its net. So very handy for moving around and doing the odd jobs to basically be the glue between the sirens in this case. So essentially it can go around and not only gather up resources from areas where resources exist while it's going along, it can also even take advantage of the resource boost as well when it gathers resources. So it's very handy on that front as well. So that resource boost I did with Vander could even have been saved and used with the caravan. Now the caravan could right now head over to the warehouse where I stored 3 resources, pick those up, and begin to bring them back over to where my sirens are currently working if that's what I want to accomplish. And as of right now, it kind of makes sense to get those resources picked up and maybe kept close to where I am. So I had the caravan actually rip right past where Vandor was, pick up a green pearl, and continue down towards the warehouse. I'll be taking that green pearl and putting it off to the side for the caravan for now. Now, something else to keep in mind in terms of using resources in the game is that I could, once the green pearl has been processed to its final material, I could use it in tandem with another material listed right here in order to get a boost on my attack by upgrading this coral sword. When I do that, I just move this marker over to let myself know that I've got that boost, and then I increase the die as necessary, or add a die at 1 if necessary. And then over here for this one, the armor, we could potentially focus on getting a boost on the armor side of the equation. So there's a number of different things to spend these resource or final materials on. Next, we go ahead and we're going to be moving this gigantic creature through the depths as it heads north, moving 6, which is a standard movement. In this case, it completely goes right over level number 1 to the opposite side as it makes its way north. Again, the only individual that can interact with it for a scale hunt at this point is Vandor, so his window is closing as this thing gets further and further away. There are no enemies in play at the moment, so we're good to go to the next game round. Going into the new game round, we check to see if there's a story marker we'll be hitting when we move the game round marker, and there will be, so there's some story to find out. Scouts are reporting from the darkness that small forces of Shirak and Rukata, level 1s, are attacking the trading town of Durant. They want to stop your attempts to connect with Durant and search for Sassari. Now, while the enemies are picking up on our progress, also there's a strong deep sea earthquake which has shaken the region. The earthquake has uncovered interesting locations. We have a cave which has shown up in the top right hand corner marked with a token. And also very close to Durant, the crumbling of terrain on the bottom of the ocean has revealed a sunken ship. Moving to the event, it states, nature has its own laws and not everything is predictable. The current falls surprisingly over the levels. -2 movement for all beings currently on level 1. This event is an interesting one. It's going to affect the caravan, being that it's down on level 1. It's also going to affect the giant whale over here, but it is not going to affect my 2 characters currently unless we plan on maybe exploring the sunken ship. But we're not completely safe. In this case, level 2 is going to be affected by this stream, which is going to be moving everybody on that level 2 3 positions. So unfortunately, my 2 Sirens are actually impacted by this. This one will be moving 3, keeping it on level 2 just on the very edge, whereas the other one here, Vandor, is going to go right over the edge. That deep sea current is shifting a number of things, possibly a result of the earthquake, even thematically. Now you're probably wondering what this cardboard token is. It takes up 4 fields and looks like water. It is called a stream tube plate. There's a front of it and a back of it on either end. It's either active or inactive, and event cards can actually change how this thing operates and whether it's even in operation or not. But essentially this acts independently from that deep sea current direction and changes. So what you can do is jump into this current and actually go from one side to the other. So for instance, Vandor could move 1 space just above north to him, and he would go firing off to the west and get right next to the whale to be able to interact with it. He could use it to his advantage. We would now head into the Sirens' turn, and it's also worth mentioning that during the setup of this next chapter we moved into, more enemies would be approaching from different appearance markers, throwing more wrenches into the equation, and the scenario would progress further. But I want to focus on 2 other major areas that you haven't seen yet. And one is I'd like to interact with one of these tokens here, the sunken ship. And the second is, instead of dealing with a regular enemy, I'd like to talk about the boss. Within Sirens the Deep Sea, you can find locations with rare artifacts. These will give you an individual bonus. Now, the game rules provide a fast and easy way to approach these, or a longer and more complex if you want a little more depth. So the standard rule is 1 artifact can be found per a game phase, which is comprised of 10 rounds. You can attempt to find it multiple times, in other words, the artifact there. If you enter the field, you have 1 chance per game round to roll higher than a 0 with the Sirens die. If you don't succeed, you can try again the next round within that phase. If you do succeed, though, you draw a face-down artifact from the stack. This is the deck of cards you'd be drawing from if you're successful, and you can only carry a maximum of 1 artifact and place it in the equipment holder. So if you already have an artifact inside your equipment holder, which would be sitting right here, then if you gain another artifact, you can choose to discard the one you have and take the new one, or you could just toss the new one if you don't like what you're getting at that point in time. So this being the fast and easy route, we'll go ahead and roll the die and see how things pan out. I'll also talk about the longer and complex in a second here. So we got ourselves a 2. This would be a success. We can draw the top card of the artifact deck. It's also worth mentioning you might have a consumable which can actually help you out. In this case, I have the Explorer consumable. So if I have this active, which I do, always find the artifact. We wouldn't even have to roll. We could actually just go ahead and flip this over and consume it to take an artifact. If we want to replenish this ability, we have to go ahead and get 2 green nets going to get this back up again. But for now, we got it anyway, so we'll take a look at what artifact we got. We found the Chalice of the Ancient Seas. It says if you have not taken any damage from an attack, you can counter with a D4 and do direct damage. That is pretty awesome. So you just saw the standard rule for searching for artifacts. This is when it's not depicted in the scenario you're playing that there's anything different around this. A certain scenario might tell you you have to do certain things during this search for artifacts for it to be a success. Now in the scenario I'm currently playing, there is a different die you'll be rolling, and again, depending on the scenario, this could change every single time in terms of what you need to do to accomplish searching for an artifact. So the Sunken Ship is actually a mini game inside of the scenario I'm currently set up for. I roll a D4 instead. On a 1 and a 2, I get a normal artifact off the top of the deck. If I get a 3 or a 4, you get some final materials. You get yourself a yellow pearl, which is in its polished or produced state, final material state, and you'd also would get yourself a nice shell as well. And of course, if you have the consumable like I did that says you always get the artifact, then in that case you would go straight for the card deck. Now the game will throw many different types of enemies at you, some like the one you saw earlier in the video. You can also potentially find a hunter that can come out and will actually specifically target a siren and go straight after that siren. So you can actually have multiple hunters. Let's say we had 2 in play, one going after each siren, and of course they'll change their focus if there's even more than the 2 hunters. But most of the enemies that come into the game state will typically be going straight after the main primary building. In this case, for the scenario, it would be Durant. And again, as I mentioned before, Durant has 1 defense currently, but there are ways to actually upgrade the main building itself to higher tiers of defense where you can get additional defense tokens, and those defense tokens will hold off the enemies that are attacking it for an entire round. And then a defense token is taken off and it goes through another round. So long as you've upgraded your primary building enough to keep those attacks at bay, you don't have to be nearby. But if you get to a spot where you don't have any more defense tokens, that city or that primary building falls, you are going to be in for a loss. Now, battles will not always end positively. You could have your sirens fall in battle. If they go to 0 life points, the battle is lost. Every siren that loses restarts in the nearest main building, this would be Durant in this case, with half of its current life points and half of its current life stream points. It also loses all the resources from its net. You can't have other sirens that are still alive come by and pick these up during the current game round, but if it's not possible, the resources disappear and are returned to the box. Essentially, they're washed away by the sea. Now, if one siren falls, but there's still another siren that has life points, they can continue to battle until they win. If the enemy still has movement after the victory, they will still move as well. Now, at some point during your journey in Sirens the Deep Sea, bosses are going to show up, and they are stronger versions, of course, than the enemies. They have powerful abilities, and they usually have 4 dice as well as a crit die in the equation. They'll work in a similar manner to the enemies you fought in the past. You'll notice here that there is a crit symbol, which was not part of the enemy I attacked earlier in the video. So that is a die which is specific, and it looks like this added into the fray. We'll talk about it in a second. 4 black dice in the fray. Lots of spirit points generated from taking down a boss. This thing moves quite quickly. It also has larger combinations because of the 4 dice now. And of course, some of them are pretty nasty. Again, depending on the level you're currently at, you'll be marking your HP just like you do with regular enemies. Now, what's really important about a boss fight, unlike the regular enemies, is that the boss comes in with armor, which is going to delay your ability to actually put damage against the boss. You're not able to put damage against it until this token on the track is in the final broken armor position. So once you've shattered the armor of the enemy, then you can actually start placing damage on it, which gives the boss a leg up at the beginning. Now, if you have saved up your spirit points, you can start cashing those in order to move that token down for each one you spend. But if you've already frivolously gone ahead and spent a bunch of spirit points, you're going to be in a tougher position when this battle breaks out. So the other thing to note too is the 2-player marker here starts halfway through the track, so it basically can get there a little quicker. If you're playing 3 to 4 players, then it's going to start at the very beginning position. Once the armor's been shattered, then the sirens will start going crazy, trying to put as much damage on the boss as possible to get that HP down to 0. Now, unlike the enemy that I took out earlier in the video, now we have 2 Sirens as part of the battle. So when you're setting up the combat round board, you're going to have 3 different individuals as part of the initiative track. And of course, you can also start utilizing synergies between the characters and their abilities to combine, and especially the special abilities. Those are very important when you start using multiple Sirens in an attack. What's really cool about the Siren singing ability, which is this one right here, is when you have multiple Sirens doing a group attack, you can actually look at this card right here in terms of how the combination actually works, again, depending on how many Sirens are in play. On the back of the game round order card, we have a full breakdown of the Siren singing combination. So in this case, with 2 Sirens against the boss, we would go ahead and spend both of our tokens from here, which I've taken this one away here. Vander takes his away. We can now do this singing at the 2 Siren level. It says it's a separate attack phase and can be activated randomly, making it very powerful when you do this. Every Siren which activates gets to roll a d4. The sum of the dice cause direct damage, and only a boss can use dodge to reduce this damage. You also get the kingdom bonus if both of the Sirens come from the same kingdom. In other words, the icons match here, and they do in this case. That would be a +2 damage on top of things. And then it says, additionally, you can activate a bonus depending on your dice combination that you roll. So there's lots of things you can potentially get here, like a healing of 5 life points for each Siren, or maybe a bleed that's going to drain life points for a certain number of rounds, or we have critical damage, which gives an auto crit. Now, I've touched on the crit die in the past, but this being an auto crit makes things interesting. An auto crit essentially means you automatically have this symbol. You don't have to roll to actually get it. There are ways, again, that you can actually get this crit die into your regular attacks. And if you land this, or it's an auto crit, then it's going to increase the damage to enemies by 50%. So in this case, getting a 4 and a 4 on the roll with 2 Sirens would be absolutely deadly. In a boss battle, you'd follow your battle rounds based on the initiatives, and you would try to work the boss down to 0 without having your Sirens taken out along the way. Now, each scenario inside the game is going to present you with different things. It won't always be a boss at the end of every single scenario. The win conditions will change and adjust, and there'll be different types of enemies to deal with that will throw different challenges and different things at you you'll have to work through. But one of the coolest aspects of Sirens that I truly enjoy is this production of being able to get resources, fine-tune them into the final materials that they are, and then use them in a number of different ways strategically across a number of different things. And I find that freedom very cool. So you not only have to deal with combat, but you're also kind of building yourself a bit of an engine, and also being very smart in what you're focusing on, and trying to use the caravans to your best advantage to get them moving, to pick up materials and bring them to certain spots, and also do some of the grunt work for you. And my thoughts in terms of solo play with controlling 2 full characters, I truly enjoy this. I think this is actually well done. I wouldn't really have any need to go to 3 or 4 when playing solo, because I really wouldn't want to increase how much I need to manage on the Siren's turn. But I love the synergies that are present between the 2 characters being controlled. Of course, if it ever was down to just 1 Siren, I really think you'd be losing out on a number of things you could actually combo. And that's probably true across a lot of solo games. Most solo players love playing true solo, but there's certain games that just lend themselves better to the synergies between 2 characters, and I think this is definitely one of them. Now, the final thing I want to touch on is the production phase. This occurs on game round 4 and 9 of the game round track. Now, this will really tie into what we did in terms of building the 2 buildings we did during this video and why that's beneficial. During the production phase, all production buildings built on a suitable resource automatically produce a final material, basically meaning you don't have to bring the basic resource to the production building. It's done automatically in this production phase. You just get that final material. Let's say hypothetically we hit game round 4. At this point, all the production buildings which are tied to a suitable resource are going to generate that final material. So as you can see, a number of final materials crop up based on the suitable resource. So we have one here, one over here, one up there, lots of things for that caravan to go around and scoop up. Now, one thing to note with Vander is that when he went through here and he picked up the 2 green pearls that I did, and then the actual main current, or the deep sea current, pushed me over top of this production building, technically, when moving over the production building and moving through it, all the resources would then become processed. Now, in the final version of the rules, we'll have to see whether that current allows the processing to still happen, but based on the current game rules as written, if you cross over it, when you have those materials in their first phase form, they would flip over to final materials. So the green pearls would become processed, meaning they're polished, and they would flip over to their opposite side. So in any case, whether you're moving around with your Sirens or the caravan and landing right on the base resource or material, and then eventually getting to the production building where it flips over and becomes a final material, there's also just the fact that production phase itself will generate a whole bunch of stuff. So long as you've built buildings next to resources that are suitable, you can really start generating a lot of resources very quickly. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up the how to play video for Sirens the Deep Sea, coming from Forgotten Tales, currently on crowdfunding right now. Really hope this full video gives you an idea as to how the game flows and operates to help you make an informed decision on it. If you want to find the campaign page or find more information on it as it continues through its updates, then you will find it in the pinned comment, video description, and on screen as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.